welcome back to the latest episode of the Master of None podcast. I am your host, Stephen, as always, joined by Westy, the regular rugby crew, and we have a very special guest joining us today. We can't really believe we're saying this, but we have Connacht head coach, the captain of the friendship, as we've called him now, aka the sports grounds. Andy Friend has joined us. Andy, thank you so much for joining us. How are you?
I'm well, thanks, Stephen, and thanks for having me on the show, boys.
No problem. Wesley, how are you? I have to ask you as well. I can't be rude.
I'm all right. Yeah, I'm a bit nervous, but we'll fire ahead.
Wes, this is a great day for Wesley. But yes, Andy's joined us. Thankfully, after great news last week, signing a 2-year extension to the Connacht to stay in the reins for another 2 years. I think every Connacht fan is happy about that. So, Andy, look, we've a few questions for you. I think we'll get stuck into it. Anyway, we will not waste your time. We want to talk, to start off briefly, kind of before you came to Connacht and your previous career. We kind of, one of your first coaching roles we know was you worked as a skills coach under Eddie Jones at the Brumbies. So first of all, I think we all kind of want to chat about Eddie Jones. We know he's sort of an enigma at this stage, and he kind of plays the role as a panto villain. Was he like that back then?
He's always been the villain, mate. He's always been the villain. Oh, actually, funnily enough, I didn't work as a skills coach under Eddie. So Eddie employed me. It's a good story, so if you don't mind, I'll share it with you. But I was a skills coach at the Waratahs in 1999, and I was working a guy called Matt Williams, that you blokes will know very well. He was the head coach. He'd actually just left, and we had a new head coach come in, Ian Kennedy. And I'd said to my wife, listen, I just need to get out of this. And I never buy the newspaper. I just don't believe in them. So I said, listen, I'm going to buy the newspaper and see if there's a job going. And we bought the Sydney Morning Herald, and on the second back page of the Sydney Morning Herald, there was a little box up there that said, attack coach wanted in Japan, ring this number. And I rang the number, and it was Eddie Jones. Eddie at the time, I'd never met Eddie, but he was coaching the Brumbies. So I met him. Hello, mate. And we had a chat, and I met with him, and we actually played, the Waratahs are playing the Brumbies the next week. At the end of that game, he said, listen, we're going to send you over there for an 8-week trial to see whether you like it and they like you. That's at Suntory. And after 8 weeks, they came back and they said, we'd like to offer you a job. And I got the job via Eddie at Suntory. At the time, he was an advisor. He still is an advisor there at Suntory. And in our break during the holiday, I'd come back and I'd work with Eddie at the Brumbies. I would do some skills, but I was a technical advisor for him. And then when I came back in 2002, he was the Wallaby coach, and I was a technical advisor working with Eddie with the Wallabies. So we've known each other since 1999. He's a great bloke. He comes across as the villain. He's got a wicked sense of humour. Very, very astute man. Knows his rugby inside out. Is one of the hardest workers you'll ever meet, but a really good bloke. And that's probably the bit that a lot of people don't see. Like he is depicted as the villain, but he's got a tremendously wicked sense of humour, and he's a good man.
Yeah, he seems to he enjoys winding people up, obviously. That is his sense of humour, what it comes across as. But is there anything he did back then when you watched him coaching that you kind of took on into your own coaching and still use to this day?
I just think his thirst for knowledge, it's refreshing. Like he constantly is seeking a different way of doing something. So even back then, and in fact, when he won the Brumbies won the title in 2000 and I might get this wrong now, 2002, 2004, somewhere around there anyway. But so that night, they won the final. The next morning, he flew out, came to Suntory and was working again the next day, just getting stuck into the Suntory stuff. So parked it, moved on. Like most people would be celebrating that for a week, but he just moved on to the next thing because there's always something else to learn and something else to get better at. So his hunger for knowledge and his hunger to be better, that endless pursuit of excellence, which is what I like to call it, is definitely alive and kicking in Eddie Jones.
Wow. So in 2012, was it you kind of took over as a head coach of the Canon Eagles? What kind of attracted you to Japan? Was it the kind of past experience you had out there, or?
Yes, we went back to Japan in 2012. Correct there, Westy. And the Eagles, I had a player I used to coach at Suntory. He was the kontoku, they call it over there, and he invited me to come across and be their head coach. So I did. I previously, like a year before, I was sacked as the Brumbies head coach, and we'd had a year out. My wife had a pretty nasty accident, And I took a year out and rode a bike from top of Australia down the bottom of Australia and tried to help her with her rehab. So, and it was during that time that, because I wasn't sure whether I was going to get back and rugby coach again, but during that period, we were on the road, on the trail for 93 days. I decided that, well, we decided, a prompt in for me that actually I would love to get back into coaching. Kez said, I think I'm feeling better. Let's have a crack at it. So we spoke to our two boys. They came on 4 days of the trip with us up in a place called Croombit National Park. We got severely lost, the boys and I, out on the bikes over these 3 days, but it gave us a bit of time to actually chat about the future. And I said, listen, thinking of going back to Japan. And they said, yeah, well, we love you, but we quite like being at boarding school, so happy for you blokes to go. So we did. We chuffed off there and took on Cannon, coached them for 2 years, and then had 2 years back at Suntory before I came home.
Was it a big culture shock kind of initially when you went to Japan?
Massive, massive. If you can just think about it, you don't speak the language. B, you can't read anything. So I remember my wife ringing me on her first shopping expedition, where she was just in tears. We had a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old at the time. She's like, I just want to buy milk, friendly, and I can't work out which one the milk is because it's drinking yogurt or milk. And I'm like, I can't help you, mate, because I've got no idea either. So it really bizarre, but we actually fell in love with the Japanese culture. They're a great group of people. They're a great culture. They enjoy the simple things, actually, like they live for their drinking and their partying, which is it's not a bad way to be. But they work very, very hard. But we've got some really good Japanese friends still to this day. And we lived in Tokyo for 7 years, a stint of 3 at the front end and then a stint of 4. When we left in 2016, it was definitely time to leave. I think you can get to a stage in a culture, in an environment where it was just time to get out. It was definitely time for us to get out, but we got very fond memories of our time there.
I guess maybe more so in the last few years, but are there any kind of main differences in kind of the way the leagues are handled in Japan than maybe they are here, or maybe they were in Super Rugby?
Yeah, I mean, the game's changed so much. Everything happens on one island in Japan. So there were 12 teams that then built into 16 teams. It's a huge league, but they're all company league. They're all company owned. So I work for Suntory, which is the whiskey and water and food and hotels. They're a massive company. But we would play, think of any famous Japanese company. So Toyota, Toshiba, Canon, Sanyo, Panasonic, they all have footy teams. And unlike here, and I love it here, I love the provincial tribalism here. I think it's brilliant. 4 provinces, 4 teams. If you're from the west of Ireland, you tend to support Connacht. If you're from Munster, you tend to support Munster. But over there, it was who you worked for. So if you worked for Canon, well, you supported Canon. And so your fan base was pretty much just the employees of that company, which is very, very different. The competition itself was, way back then, it wasn't anywhere near as competitive as it is now. But the influx of a lot of ex-Wallabies and ex-Kiwis and now ex-All Blacks, and now we're getting a lot of some European-based players going over there, a lot of South Africans. So there's definitely some great footballers over there and a really good Japanese rugby culture, and it's a very healthy competition there now.
Yeah, I think Ireland felt the brunt of that success in the last World Cup, didn't we?
Yeah, exactly. After your Japan stint, Andy, you moved back to Australia and to coach the international sevens team. And forgive me if I'm wrong, but what was your experience coaching sevens at that stage? It wasn't vast, was it?
No, so in 2004, I was working at the Waratahs and I got sacked. I've been sacked twice in my coaching career, one with the Waratahs and then with the Brumbies.
We weren't going to bring it up, Andy. We weren't going to bring it up.
I'm more than happy to talk about it because as after the end of my first sacking, I got a call from a really good friend who's sadly passed away now, but he rang me. He was my coach when I was a young player. And Bob Hitchcock was his name. And he rang me to say, you can now call yourself a coach. You've been sacked. I said, God for that. Yeah. So in 2004, I was sacked from the Waratahs and I got offered a 2-week stint with the Aussie Sevens to go over there, to go to Wellington and then into LA. I knew nothing about sevens. but I went, yeah, okay, I'll have a crack at that, because I was waiting on I was actually coaching the Aussie under-20s at the time, and I was waiting to try and land a job, which I eventually did with Harlequins in London. So I had the first 6 months of that year, which I didn't have much happening. So I went over to Wellington with the Aussie Sevens team. Bill Millard was the coach. He worked at Connacht, actually. He's now with Harlequins himself, Billy Millard. And we had a great week in Wellington. That we then went to LA and had a great week there. And I actually fell in love with the game. I thought, this is a cracking game. I used to hate it as a player because it's too hard. You know, you're just running non-stop. But as a coach, it was really good because they're doing the running and you're trying to manage it for them and keep them alive. So that was my only extent of sevens. It was literally those 2 weeks. So when I applied for the job in late 2015, heading into 16, I wasn't sure how I was going to go. I was asked to apply, so that's normally a good sign. And I was lucky enough to land a job in January 2016, which then took us to Rio, and then another 2.5 years after that.
Is there any kind of main differences in the kind of the way you go about coaching with a sevens team or a 15s team, or is it the same kind of basic player development that you have in mind?
It is different, totally different from an athletic point of view. So, you know, I always say if you can play sevens on the international scene, you can definitely play 15s, and they're going to be robust, they're going to be resilient, and they're going to be able to handle pressure and fatigue. So it's actually a phenomenal game. I love it. I actually love the game of sevens. I think it's I always say to people that, you know, there's 2 types of canoeing. You can canoe on still water, and you go as fast as you quick, or you're in the rapids. And you know, 15s is on still water, and rugby sevens is down the rapids, and just sort of hold on, do your best. And from an educational point of view for a young rugby player, I would always push them into sevens. You're not going to be a worse rugby player playing sevens if you want to come back to 15s, but it teaches you, you know, skills under pressure. It actually hones your skill base, because you have to be so accurate with your tackle and your catch and your pass and your run and all of those things. And you're under massive fatigue. So if you can handle that mentally, then you can handle the 15s game pretty easily.
2016 obviously was the Olympic year, the first time ever I think Australia Sevens was in the Olympics, obviously, and you've John Porch on that team. What was that experience like, going to an Olympics? Obviously it wasn't the result that you were looking for, but you know, going to Rio and experiencing the Olympics, you know, the whole experience that is, how was that for you?
Stephen, I'm going to say it was awkward, and it's not the response most people think, because, you know, as a young bloke, all I ever wanted to do was go to the Olympics as an athlete, but I wasn't good enough to go there as an athlete. So when we finally got the opportunity, sevens was going to be in there, I had this massive buzz about me. But why it was awkward was it was in Rio de Janeiro, and Rio de Janeiro is not a very wealthy city. And we had this massive movement, the Olympic movement, rock up. And like, we had highways that we could travel on and others couldn't travel on. And they're living below us in these favelas, which just didn't seem right. And it was awkward because, you know, here was all this money rocking into town that was going to be, you know, it's like a tornado sweeping through, when I felt the money could be better used putting it back into Rio de Janeiro and trying to help the people. So it was just uncomfortable. The games itself, I loved the village, was unbelievable. We all ate in the same food hall, which was massive. It was about 100 meters long by about 50 meters wide, but all your different shapes and sizes and genders of athlete were there. Your tall basketballers to your power lifters to your gymnasts and the Usain Bolts and the Roger Federers. They're all in there, just, you know, just normal people. So seeing all of that was really, really cool, and being a part of the Olympic Games itself was really neat. But it didn't end the way we wanted it to. We ended up coming 8th, which certainly wasn't what we went out there to do. Our women won, which was fantastic, and that was definitely a coaching error on my behalf, not being able to, or not. So what happened there, fellas? The women played day 1, day 2, day 3, and we played day 4, 5, 6. And the Aussie girls were favourite to win it. And we actually, I remember sitting up that night, the night before our first tournament, watching the girls and cheering them on. And they won, which is fantastic. And we're all so pumped and so excited. And we had a few blokes had partners in that team, but none of our blokes really got to bed because they were too pumped up, trying to wait to see the girls. And then the next morning, blokes being blokes, the girls had just won. We've got to win. So we were so anxious in this opening game against France. And my coaching error was, I should have read it. I should have seen what was coming, and we should have dealt with how are we going to control our emotions when the Aussie girls win. And it was so obvious to me when they did win and we didn't deal with it. But it was a great coaching lesson about just being fully prepared and making sure you stay ahead of the game. So we didn't. We lost our opening game to France. We then beat Spain. We then beat South Africa. So we now got into a quarterfinal, and it happened to be the South Africans again. And you don't beat South Africa twice in one day. So we dropped out after that.
To step back from rugby just for a second, I know you met your wife while working at Outward Bound, kind of taking people on tours of the Outback, which is obviously something very alien to most of the Irish people. Tell us about kind of that kind of work. I mean, it's a big difference from rugby, and is it something that you miss or that you would like to revisit at some point in your life?
Oh, you boys have done your homework. Well done, fellas. So Kerry and I both worked at an organisation called Outward Bound. And actually we met, I was doing, in order to get in to become an instructor, there was they called it a standard course, and there was a 26-day course that had 3 days of national base, and then you started at a place called Charlotte's Gap, or Charlotte's Pass, sorry, and you walked up Mount Kosciuszko, which is Australia's tallest mountain, and then you spent the next 22 days walking to the sea, which is about 340 kilometres away. Walking, rafting, rock climbing, just making your way there. And you had to get there. That was your test to see whether, and they sort of monitor you along the way to see whether you were going to be, or you were deemed good enough to become an instructor. Anyway, day 2, our group that we were with, we were meant to pick up a food drop in a place called Dead Horse Gap. And we were madly lost in the Australian bush, and it was like thick. We're in the middle of the snowy mountains, and I remember our instructor had told us stick to high ground, but us being gung-ho and young, we're like, no, we'll go the shortest route down through the gullies. And of course, down through the gullies, what ends up in gullies? Water. What happens when you got a lot of water? Things grow, things get boggy, and we got stuck down in these things. So we missed this. We couldn't find this. We couldn't find this food drop. And when we finally found it about a day late, I remember walking towards, and there was nobody else. You hadn't seen anybody, but you could see this vehicle, this Toyota Land Cruiser, and I'm like, that's got to be it. This will be Dead Horse Gap. And as we got closer, I could see someone in the car, and I thought, she got pretty eyes actually, and she got a nice smile. And then as she got out of the car, she was wearing jeans and these Blundstone boots, we call them, riding boots, and I'm thinking, she looks pretty good to me. And it was Kez. And then not only that, but she had our food as well. So so I sort of met Kerry that day, and when I finished the course, they said, listen, well done, you're going to become an instructor, anywhere you'd like to go. And because it was a mobile base, we went all around Australia, and I said, I'll go wherever that Kerry's going. And they said, well, no, you won't actually. So they sent her to Perth, and they sent me back to the snowy mountains. And we only met her about 4 months later. And yeah, the next thing, we hit it off pretty well. Next thing, she was pregnant with Joshy, and he's our eldest boy. And we left Outward Bound to have Josh. And that's when I told her, listen, I have a past, and it's a rugby past. I played a lot of footy, and I'm a rugby coach. So the poor lady met me not knowing I was a rugby coach. She thought I was like just from the bush, out in the bush, and I had to drop it on her that I had this other past, and we've been on that trail ever since.
That's brilliant. I love that. The fact that she was there with the food. She's like an angel, literally an angel waiting for you, Andy. We'll move on to your early Connacht days. Obviously, as I said before, great news. Signed the 2-year extension to stay with Connacht. With COVID and the way life has been, I hate to bring up COVID because obviously, unfortunately, everyone talks about it. But I'm sure there was a temptation maybe to head back home. I'm sure it's been a while since you've been home, seen your sons, obviously, and how big of the temptation was it to go home?
Yeah, it certainly was, because we had at the time, if you remember, we had Kyle Godwin here, we had David Horwitz here, we had Tom McCartney here, David Nisifora and Anthony Eddy all went home. And Kez and I looked at him. We said, "Oh well, maybe we just go home." But then we just paused for a minute and said, "Hang on a minute. A, we don't know whether we can get back, and B, I'm here as the head coach of Connacht, and to me it just looked like I didn't want to desert it. Like I had a responsibility here. We were still mid-season. We had a lot of blokes who had uncertainty now around their future. So it became a pretty easy decision to say, listen, no, we're not going to try and go home. We'll stay here and we'll see this thing out. And eventually we will get home. So we actually had flights booked for July, because if you remember that happened back in March, and we were still thinking, well, we'll still get home in July, because I haven't been home yet since I've been here, so 2.5 years now. But as we all know, listen, things took over, and we haven't been able to get back. But we will get back at some stage. But what we felt, it was really important for us to stay here and to be here and to basically lead in my role as the head coach. So that's what we've done, and I'm pleased we made that decision.
Yeah, and back in 2018, when you were appointed of Connacht, what was your knowledge of the team and the area prior to that appointment?
Well, I was lucky enough to play when I was coaching Harlequins. We came over here and we played Connacht it must have been 2008, I think 2007, 2008. I remember the game because we won Harlequins won 17-16 or 17-18, won by a point. But I remember John Kingston so I was the head coach of Quins, and JK was our forwards coach. He had been the head coach at Galwegians, and he said to me, hopefully we get to play this team Connacht. I said, where are they from? He said, West of Ireland. He said, it's a brilliant city, friend. You're going to love it. And we stayed at Jury's Inn, and I remember he was like a very excited kid on a birthday. He just wanted to take me to all these pubs where he's old drinking holes. And I remember coming out of we got here the night before the game, and we were prone to having a couple of drinks before games, because as a coaching staff, you didn't have to be sober. But I remember trying to fit in all these pubs and thinking, I don't have to come back to this town because there's so many good pubs in this city. So that was my recollection of it. And then we played Connacht. I just remember them being a really gritty team, and we played on a typical night at the sports ground with the rain coming in sideways. And I remember thinking, what a really, like, I was really impressed with the supporters, because back home you wouldn't have got anyone there. But it was, the terrace wasn't what it is now, but there was a lot of supporters there, and they were really passionate and really earthy, I felt. So that was my recollection of it. So when I came, when we knew that there was a job going here, I said to Kez, it's a pretty special spot. And we came over, we had the interview, and the rest is history.
Was there any particular pub that attracted you back to Connacht?
No,
or anything else, anything in particular that attracted you back?
It was the Guinness. Listen, the Guinness, it is different here. But I couldn't remember any of the pubs, and we only went to about 2 or 3, but I couldn't remember any of them. It was a bit of a maze, to be honest with you, or a bit of a haze. But, well, as we know, there's some great pubs in town, and I can't wait for them to open up again.
Was there anything maybe about the Connacht team in the previous few years that you'd seen that kind of made you excited to work?
Well, I knew Pat Lamb when he was coaching the Auckland Blues, and I was coaching at the Brumbies, so I knew Pat from there, and I knew another guy called Tristan Sharp, who was part of the athletic performance team here. And Tristan and I was working in Japan at the time when Connacht won it, and during his early time here, or during his time here, which I think he was here 2014, 15, 16, something like that, he would Skype me. We didn't have Zooms back then. We probably did, but I didn't know about it. But he would Skype me once every month or so, and we'd have a chat. So I was following the team from afar, virtually through Tristan, because he was a good man, and he actually coached my son at Sydney University. That's how I had the relationship with him. So I was very aware of Connacht's success and watched a few of their games, and was really impressed with the way they'd gone. So I was aware of that, but yeah, in the couple of years when I was in the sevens, I actually just had my head in sevens, and I didn't watch any 15s rugby for 2 years.
Yeah, very good. Well, with this, the way this season and last season's been, Andy, with the stop starting of leagues, games being cancelled or pushed back, has this been like the most difficult season as for you as a head coach so far?
Yeah, it probably has, Stephen. I think yeah, every season, there's different things. I've had a few really tricky years. We've had a couple of. I had the death of a player when I was at the Brumbies in my first year. That would still have to be the hardest year that I've ever had to coach because of Macca's passing. That was really tricky. I've had other years where I've lost my job that they've been tough. So there's always, for whatever reason, rugby seasons never seem to go smoothly. COVID's definitely added another dimension. But it's one that I feel like that we're working through, and I think we've sort of made every post a winner as best we can. I can't wait till we finish it, to be honest with you, because it's not normal, and just allow us to get back to what we used to consider normal would be good.
You mentioned that not normal. Has it been tough, in particular for the new signings coming to Connacht? Because normally gelling with the team and the teammates is a massive part of settling into a new team, and that really isn't as possible as it used to be when I'm sure lads would go over to other teammates' houses and kind of bond that way. Has it been tough for the new signings, like the likes of Papali and whatnot, coming into a team and not being able to gel as well as previously?
Yeah, it really has, and as you say correctly, that's one of the big things, not just the footy teams, but of any teams. You need that social camaraderie together, and we haven't been able to do it. Haven't been able to have the boys, the team socials. Even post game, you can't have a drink, which doesn't happen too often in the pro world now. There's not a lot of drinking, but every now and then, if you haven't got a game the following week, and we might throw a couple of cases in the change room, but that would be once or twice a year. But you can't do that anymore because we're not allowed to we're not allowed to be on public transport or in taxis. So you've got to be able to drive home. So you can't do that. So all of that sort of stuff, it's just different. I'm not going to say it's tricky. Well, it is tricky, but it's just very different to what the way rugby's always been. And I think the way rugby should be. Rugby should be, at the appropriate time, and anything else, you've got to be able to let your hair down. You've got to be able to relax and enjoy some lighthearted stuff with the group of people you work with. So I can't wait for that to come back.
Andy, by all accounts, you seem like a very kind of laid-back person. We actually spoke to Jimmy Duffy a couple of weeks ago, and he was saying you were great for letting the coaches kind of find their own way and kind of do their own thing rather than micromanaging them. Is that a way you've always been as a coach, or is that just something you've grown into over all the experience you've had?
I think it's the way I've always been, and really because that's the way I like to be treated. So, it's the old saying: no point having a dog and doing the barking yourself. So if you've got the dog, well, let him bark, let him do his stuff. So, and I always respected the coach. Not that I had a lot of them, to be honest with you, when I was coming through as an assistant coach. They wanted to tell you what they wanted you to do. Now, I've got no issue with pointing me in a direction, but allow me to have the capacity to try and find the best way to achieve that. And someone once said to me, they said, what's 2 + 8, Freddie? I said 10. I said, exactly. What's 5 + 5? 10. Good. So you can get to the end product, but you can do it many different ways. And once I became really comfortable with that, which I have been for a long, long time, I'm quite happy to let somebody go about it their way. And sometimes I won't have seen that way that person's trying to do it, but I sit back and I reflect and say, wow, that's unbelievable. I wouldn't have ever done it that way, but they got there, So I believe in giving people space. I believe in giving people autonomy. I believe in allowing people, if they're the right people, which we have at Connacht, giving them the opportunity to do it their way and end up at the end point, which is probably 10. So how you want to get there, it's up to you.
Yeah, we'll move on to signings. Andy, you've made some great signings, especially in the past year or so. The likes of Sammy Arnold, Alex Wooten, Conor Oliver coming in. These players all have a similar kind of theme of being at other teams and not maybe being starting every week, but very obviously decent players and maybe a possible chip on the shoulder. Is that something that you kind of target as when you're looking at recruitment, or is it that just a happy coincidence?
Yeah, I think it's the way we have to do it here, to be honest, Stephen. So, unless we have the homegrown players coming through, of which we've got some really special ones coming through at the moment, but unless we have that, then, we don't have the playing budget that the Leinster, Munster, Ulster have. We don't. That's a fact of it. But at the same time, I don't see that as a hindrance. I just see it as a way that, and we use the phrase, we attempt to find the rough diamond and polish him. So when we're out there looking, we're looking for those players who we see quality in them as athletes, as players. And we also see hunger in them not wanting to be where they are and wanting to be able to come in and make a difference and improve. So, the likes of Sammy and the three that you mentioned, but also the likes of a Jack Ainger. We've got a young bloke, Oshin Dowling, who hopefully will get his first cap for Connacht this weekend. He's another beauty that we got out of Leinster. We've got I believe, some really special young players coming through who in other areas probably didn't shine. But they're getting the chance to shine here now. You look at John Porch, Benny O'Donnell when Benny finally gets back up and running, Abraham Papali'i. There's a lot of quality there within our playing ranks that maybe others don't see, but it's certainly the way we go about our recruitment. We're looking for those fellas, and it's great to see them when they do come through.
Yeah, you mentioned Papali'i, and that's actually a good segue because you got him from the Meter 10 Cup, which obviously is a fantastic competition with plenty of talent, but it's not normally where an Irish club necessarily would go to look for players. Is there a recruitment process in place for you to find players like that, or was he just sort of so good that you kind of had to steal him?
No, well, the way we found him, I'll give the compliments there to our analysts, our two analysts, Simon Kavanagh and Oisin O'Doleg, who, they do a mountain of work. And I think most people look at analysts and say, well, they must code the games and video the training. Well, that's part of their role, but one of their other major roles and responsibilities is to sift through all the numbers, a bit like a money ball. It's probably the easiest way to describe it. So we've come up with a group of stats and measurements that we target, and they basically run the numbers through all the competitions that are going on around the world, and what falls out is the likes of an Abraham Papali'i, and there's a few other really healthy names that have fallen out of there. Hoskins Satutu that no one knew. Well, Simon brought him to our attention before. I'd never heard of him before. He's now an All Black. We were looking at another guy we found in South Africa who's now killing it over in the Premiership with a Premiership team. We went for him, but we didn't get him. So the process of which we're going through, and that these two blokes have managed to come up with works, and it gives us access to players before others have found them. And then the job is to try and sell Galway and Connacht to them. And if we can do that, which we did with Abraham, then hopefully we get this perfect fit, and it's a rough diamond that we can then polish.
Sorry, just to intervene, Wes, before you going. Are you saying that Hoskins Satutu possibly could have been a Connacht player before you give Connacht fans a heart attack?
No, what I'm telling you there is when we went to, so it said I'd never heard of the bloke, but he was one of the first names that fell out. And once we inquired, we found out that actually the New Zealand teams had identified his talent and that he was likely to get a super contract. So we definitely approached and said, listen, we might have a spot for you, but the Kiwi teams got onto it ahead of us. But I certainly had never heard of the bloke before he fell out of this, we'll call it the number machine. He fell out of the number machine.
Just on the topic of recruitment, again, we were talking to Luke Carty a few weeks ago, and he said he got his current role with the Giltinis over in the Major League Rugby because Darren Coleman called you looking for a player. Does that kind of thing happen a lot between coaches? Is that something you've done yourself? Maybe was your coaches asking if they had nifty players?
It happens all the time, Westy, and you'd be amazed at DC, Darren Coleman, DC is his nickname. DC rang me and said, looking for a 10. We'd actually just let Luke go. And my message to Luke when he was leaving was, listen, you are a good rugby player. I just think you need opportunity to play in a different environment. So when DC rang me and said, looking for a tan. I said, well, here's the bloke. So we were trying to send him actually originally down to Gordon, where DC won was coaching in Sydney Premiership, where they won the grand final this year. But because of COVID, Luke couldn't get there. And then when he took on the Giltinis, he was good enough to take him across there. So Luke's going to head off there. But it happens all the time. The coaching world and the rugby world is actually very small. So what a lot of players don't realise, I would get a call. It's not every week, but it would at least be once a fortnight from someone saying, we're looking at this bloke, what do you reckon? And if he's good, I'll say, mate, he's a beauty, I'll take him. But if he's not, and if they haven't done the right thing by the club I've been at, or they're not a good person, that young bloke, unfortunately, he would never, he wouldn't be, a lot of the players wouldn't be aware of clubs that were looking at them but never did, because a coach just basically said, no, put a line through his name, mate, I wouldn't touch him.
Wow. You mentioned a few minutes ago about having to play kind of a money ball in Connacht and just kind of, not having the resources of, say, a Leinster. And I think you said before about kind of Leinster needing to share a bit of the wealth and kind of the overall benefit that might be to Irish rugby. Have you kind of seen anything that makes you think that atmosphere has changed, or is that still the same?
Well, yeah, we've got Jack Ainger here with us this year, and I think everyone's seen the benefit of that. We've got Oshin Dowin, and hopefully you will see the benefit of that. So I think at the end of the day, it makes good sense to me as to why, Leinster have all the talent sitting out there, because that's pretty much where the population is and where rugby's played. So I do get that, and I actually totally get the point around, if you're from that province, you probably want to play for that province. But it comes down to a sheer weight of numbers. As a rugby player, you only get better if you're playing rugby. And if you're sitting 4 deep in a program, in a squad, and you're not getting much game time, well, in my way of thinking, I'd be looking to go somewhere else. Connacht, I reckon one of the most important things about Connacht, which I love too, is that we want to create we want to have homegrown players. So we're constantly trying to support our clubs and support rugby in Connacht to bring through the likes of, a young Colin Riley, a Jack Carty, a Noel Murray, Matty Burke, all these young blokes who have come through the Connacht system. At the same time, we're also very aware that we don't have the playing base of other programs. So we're looking for that kid coming out of Leinster, Munster, Ulster, who is sitting 3rd deep and just has a hunger to want to be better. And so you pick up the likes of a Shane Delahunt, a Gavin Thornbury, a Paul Ball, a Connor Fitzgerald. They're all those sort of blokes who weren't household names, were young blokes sitting in programs that were well behind a lot of others, saw an opportunity down at Connacht, came down. And then we get the likes of the Sammy Arnolds and the Connor Olivers and the Alex Wootens, because they have been pro players, but again, sitting 3rd or 4th choice in their programs and wanted to get an opportunity. So there's layered approaches to it. Bottom line is, if we could have 100% Connacht rugby players, we would. But until we get that, we'll try and pick the eyes out of the other province and get those young blokes that want to be successful and just want an opportunity.
This season, Andy, it's been a season of up and downs. Obviously, a great win against Leinster, an amazing kind of performance and potential comeback against Racing. But then we also seen pretty tough losses to Munster, Bristol, and then recently Ospreys. How have you personally rated the season so far?
I'll use your word frustrating there, Stephen. It has been, because we've seen the highs of some of those performances, and then the not so good performances, of which you mentioned 3 of them there. And it's probably just been inconsistent. So we need to find that consistency. We've got a massive opportunity this coming Friday night to go to Rodney Parade and get another win, which we desperately need. It's a team that they're tough. They're tough to play over there. At the same time, I think if we play our game style and we're clinical, and that's probably the word we haven't been this year. We haven't been clinical enough. Then we're going to battle. So. It's been a frustrating year, mate, with results, with COVID, with everything. But, we are still marching down the road and have a positive outlook on it. And I keep saying to the players, fellas, it's only failure if we don't learn from it. One of the things that I was really pleased with coming out of the Munster game, we fought, we stayed until the death. We should have put them away with 15 men against 13. We should have put them away, no doubt about that. We didn't. The next week, or the next game, we have the Ospreys. We get them down to 14 men just before half time. We have the exact same scrum, different position. But the players, because of the conversation they'd had, Paul Ball and Kieran Marmion do a nice little off play and boil the scores. So I look at that and I go, brilliant, we've learned. And then we come out and we have a stinking last 40. So, there's highs and lows in all of it, mate. And that's probably the life of a rugby team and a rugby coach. You just don't try and stay in the heights too long, and don't try and stay in the lows too long. Just try and keep it as even as you can. And there's always next week, and that's what we're looking for this week.
Yeah, exactly. The losses to Munster and Ospreys, a few people, kind of in the media, were kind of calling out the leadership group within the team and the players. Can you tell us just how important that leadership group is, and how much do you actually rely on them and communicate to them, on a day-to-day basis?
To me, it's massive. And again, it's unfair to call those blows. At the end of the day, it sits at my feet, those losses. So I've got to take responsibility for that. And if the leaders on the field, if we're not decisive enough, well, again, that comes back to me in maybe not challenging enough or giving them the right direction with it. So I'm not here to blame leaders at all. We own that. We all own that loss. It's not players v coaches. It's our loss. But back to your question, our leadership group, to me, are everything. Like, at the end of the day, well, my style of leadership is, it's not a follow me. It's I'm here to support. I have a key set of values which I firmly believe in, and I live. And I like our footy team to live the same set of values. But I'm here to support you. I trust you, and I want to make you better, and I care about you. And that's the type of leadership that I try and bring. And then out of that, you try and then get a game style and a group of players that play with that. They play for each other. They play to be the best they can be. They play to if they make error, they're going to learn from that and be better the next time. So I think the role of the leadership group, the role of the leader is massively important, and then the role of the leadership group is to try and be a conduit between the role of your leader and the rest of the players. And they're hugely important for us here at Connacht.
Andy, with the Six Nations about to start and the squad being announced a couple of weeks ago, obviously it's great to see the guys involved, but maybe there's a bit of disappointment on the sides of maybe Jack or Finlay or Kieran. How do you kind of, as a coach, deal with players who might be kind of feeling a bit hard done by not being in the national squad?
Well, I'm there to support them. At the end of the day, I don't sit in that selection meeting. Neither do they. So we're normally realistic with it too, and say, well, what were you told, and then how can we help you get in there? Because every player wants to play for their country. Every player wants to be at that top part of the game. So, and then it's really there to give them that opportunity, put your arm around them, support them, and see whether you can help them back up there. So I'd agree with you. We've only got 4 in there at the minute. I did feel for a few of those blokes. We've also got the likes of a Paul Boyle, who's been playing great rugby this year. We got the likes of an Alex Wootton. I think he's done really well as a back 3 player, scored a lot of tries. Tom Daly's not much more that man can do at the minute. And we've got a few others that I know when they get game time, they're going to turn the eye of the national coach as well. But at the end of the day, that's Andy Farrell's team, and we got to respect that. Continue to support our players and keep pushing them in the right direction to hopefully get them there one day.
Just one other thing for me then, just an interview I read pretty recently on you renewing your contract, you said that some of it kind of hinged on support from the IRFU. Would you be able to expand a little bit on what you meant, or maybe what has come of those conversations with the IRFU?
Yeah, well, so when we were going through the contract negotiations, it was muted that the IRFU were going to support us to a certain level of financial support. And if they did that, then through my work with Tim Allnut and Willie Ruan, I was really comfortable with the contract offers that we could put out there. Because one of the big things for me was, I think we've worked really hard to build this squad. What I didn't want to happen was that we would just lose the squad because we didn't have the financial support to be able to keep it. So one of the things I said to Willie was, until you get the green light from the RFU that they are going to stump up with the money that they said they were going to stump up with, then I'm not prepared to sign. So thankfully the RFU came through with the money that they said they were going to do. And once that was, once I learned about that, it was a pretty easy decision to sign. Now, whether everyone stays, that's up to those players, but I can look at, well, I'm aware of all the contract offers that are going out there at the moment. I believe that they're good offers, albeit in the current situation where we all are in the world with COVID. Others may find other opportunities somewhere else, and if they do, well, that's up to them. But I can stand by the fact that I think the offers that Connacht have made are healthy ones, and hopefully we get to keep the majority of our squad.
We'll finish on a couple of kind of general questions, Andy, because we know that you have to go soon. We got a few listener questions in. We'll fly through them if possible. So first comes in from Cathal Gilmore, and he kind of asks, is there any update on the new stadium? Obviously, work was halted, but where are we in the progress with that?
I'm going to let Willie answer that. He's not here to answer it, so he's not going to answer it here. All I know is the ambition to have that stadium has not changed. It's not wavered at all. And everyone from Willie to the board and everyone at Connacht Rugby is very aware that for Connacht Rugby to continue to progress, we need that stadium. We need it for the fans. We need to have a bigger fan base coming to watch the games. And we need it for the facilities, because our facilities at the moment we're making do with it. But if we can improve those, our training facilities, again, we're going to get a better product.
Nice one. Second one comes in from Fergal Flanagan. He kind of asks, is there any major skill set difference between Irish players and Australian players that you've seen throughout your years? Any one that sticks out?
Without a shadow of doubt, their capacity, the Irish players' capacity to play in inclement weather, unbelievable. And you look at it, but it's a genuine skill set, because in Australia, mate, we play on hard surfaces, and virtually every day is a sunny day, not a lot of wind or rain. Every now and then it does rain, and it's not a pretty game of footy to watch, because we're not used to playing in that. But what amazes me is the skill level of these blokes. We train and play in this stuff every single day, and their capacity to be able to still handle the football, whether it's catch, pass, or kick, it is unbelievable. So I'm mightily impressed with that ability. And I would also say, I think just their kicking game, because of, again, the conditions, kicking and set piece game, it's head and shoulders above Australia. If you look at our open field running game, evasive skills, Australians tend to be better at that, but it makes sense because we play on that sort of a surface, and that's what we do.
Next question comes from a Matthew Adams, and I'm told that you'll get this because I don't get the reference, but I'm told that you will, and I'll probably pronounce this rugby club wrong, but he asks, are Petersham or Petersham Rugby Club your favourite team in Sydney?
Yeah, I do get that question. Good on you, Taff. Yes, they are. Would have to be. Petersham's, they play their subbies team, and my son played for him. And and I went down, and I was lucky enough at the time when I was coaching the Aussie Sevens, when we had free weekends, I ducked down there, and it was just a really good social group of blokes. Played rugby for the right reasons. It's a great club. Won the championship, or won the premiership that year. But they played hard, and both on and off the footy field, and they're a great club. They're a great club.
The last question we have, I think we couldn't have you on without, especially at this time of the year, without asking about potential signings or whatnot. But someone did tweet me rumours of Bill Johnson coming from Ulster. Is there any exclusives you can give us here, Andy, on the podcast?
I can't give you any exclusives. I promise you. No, listen, we've got some good young tens here. We've got Jack Carty's, we know. We've got Connor Fitz, who I think is a really exciting prospect. We've got Connor Dean, and Dino. Unfortunately for Dino, he just hasn't had a lot of opportunity to play rugby this year. He had a game right at the front end of the season, and then he broke his thumb, and then there hasn't been other games for Eagles. But he's a very talented footballer. And then sitting in our academy, coming up behind young bloke who plays for Corinthians, Cahill Ford, who's a very talented footballer too. So we're pretty good with tens at the minute, Stephen. Leave that one on the rumour mill, mate.
Okay, fair enough. Westy, we've a few more questions, but I think we'll finish on this one because I know we're coming up on time, and I want to finish on you've already mentioned it, but the incredible feat by yourself back in 2011 when you did cycle, 5,000 kilometers from Cook down to Canberra to raise awareness for Brain Injury Australia and Outward Bound. You did raise $170,000, and it did take you 93 days. Obviously, charity close to your heart after your wife Kerry did come off a bike in 2010 and suffered a serious brain injury. Tell us about physically, obviously, 93 days on a bike and 5,000 kilometers. How was your body after that?
It needed a rest, and it got one. Listen, it was. If I think back on it, it was one of the most amazing 3 months of my life, because what a lot of people don't know is that the road the trail that I took, it's called the Bicentennial Trail. It's the longest horse trail in the world. So you're not sitting on a road, you're sitting on a horse trail, and you're up and down mountains and through creeks and rivers and all the rest of it. And the reason we did it was because for Kerry at the time, she needed a sense of purpose, and all the bits of reading that we'd done on brain injury and how to try and help a brain recover was to take it away from clutter. So to get out of what we consider our normal life here, where there's computers going off and phone calls and all the rest of it, try and get out in the bush if you can. And then try and achieve something, or have a purpose and have an achievable target that you can do every single day. So the way we worked it was, I'd leave from point A with Kerry in the morning, and we'd agree that I was going to get to point B. I averaged about 65 kilometers a day, which doesn't sound like a lot, but when you've got a bike laden with, all my water, my panniers, all my sleeping gear, emergency gear, and you're just heading off into the bush, it's a heavier bike, and you're crossing. I think I climbed the Himalayas the equivalent of 10 times, so we did 85 kilometers of climbing, and you're in the middle of Australian bush. You're just not seeing people, so you're out there on your own. But I would leave point A and I'd get to point B, and Kez's job was to drive the car to get to point B. She couldn't follow the route that I was on, so she would have to map out her route to get to point B. So it might only be 80 kilometers or 60 kilometers, and she might have to do 250k of driving, and she never missed a beat with it. So I would arrive at that point. It'd be a reference point on a map. We'd say we're going to meet there, and she would be there with her tent, and she'd have the fire set up. She would have set up the tent. She would have set the fire up. I would arrive. She cooks a meal. I'd eat the meal, fall asleep, wake up in the morning, 5 o'clock, get up and do it again. I say, I'll meet you at point B tonight. And we do that. Sometimes there was 2 or 3 days in between, because I couldn't get to where a drop-off point where she could be. So there's a few occasions where I had a couple of nights out on my own, and then I'd meet her 2 days' time. There's a few occasions where I got horrendously lost and I didn't see her that night. And then we tried to have radio contact and we couldn't find each other. And so anyway, listen, it was a pretty incredible adventure. But what came out of it was some great fundraising, but more importantly, a Kerry that had found her sense of purpose again, and had found a way of being successful at something again, and we got a very happy and healthy lady out of it, which was the main target.
Yeah, just incredible, and I think we're all delighted, obviously, that she's feeling well and feeling a lot better since. And I think everyone in Connacht, who lives here and supports here, has been delighted with how yourself and Kerry have really, kind of indulged in the culture of Connacht and kind of made it your home. We can see in the background here of your picture, you have a nice a painting of down by the Spanish Arch. And I think everyone is delighted that you have done that. So look, Andy, we've taken up enough of your time. Again, I can't thank you enough for coming on the podcast. It really does mean a lot. We wish you the best of luck Friday, and in future, obviously, with Connacht, we'll be supporting you, and hopefully in the actual sports ground in soon time. So thanks, Andy. Appreciate it.
Cheers, Stephen. Cheers, Westy, and thanks for the questions, boys. And thanks for your ongoing support. Lovely to see you in your Connacht tops too, fellas.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks, Andy. Good luck.